June 6, 1944, 07:42 hours, Omaha Beach, Normandy. Private First Class Wilson Jefferson of the 320th Barrage Balloon Battalion crouched in the shadow of a burning half-track, his medic's bag clutched against his chest as seawater and blood lapped at his boots. He believed his greatest challenge would be overcoming enemy fire to reach the wounded. Instead, the true battle would unfold once he got there, a desperate fight against time, blood loss, and the most devastating wounds he had ever witnessed. Before we dive into this story, drop a quick hi in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. It really helps support the channel. This is the untold story of how a medical innovation, born from desperation and dismissed as ridiculous, would transform battlefield medicine and save dozens of lives on the bloodiest beach in American military history. The cold dawn light of June 6th cast long shadows across the channel as Private First Class Wilson Jefferson stood on the deck of the transport ship USS Charles Carroll. At 24 years old, he was one of the 621 African-American soldiers of the 320th Barrage Balloon Battalion, the only black combat unit to land on the beaches during the initial D-Day assault. Despite the enormity of the moment, Jefferson's thoughts were firmly focused on the medical pack secured to his side. "You ready for this, Jeff?" asked Corporal Marcus Williams, another medic in Jefferson's unit, using the nickname everyone had given him since basic training. "Ready as I'll ever be," Jefferson replied, double-checking the morphine syrettes in his kit. "Just hoping this training pays off." "Training," Williams scoffed. "Nothing's going to prepare us for what's waiting on that beach." Jefferson nodded silently. Williams was right. Despite rigorous preparation at Camp Tyson in Tennessee and additional medical training at Fort Bragg, Jefferson knew that battlefield medicine was unpredictable. As one of the few black medics assigned to the invasion force, he had spent the past 18 months preparing for this moment, absorbing every bit of medical knowledge he could from the segregated training facilities. At 05:30 hours, the naval bombardment of the German coastal defenses began. The thunderous barrage from battleships and destroyers was so intense that Jefferson felt each concussion in his chest. Through breaks in the early morning mist, he could see distant flashes along the French coastline. Each explosion brought the reality of what lay ahead into sharper focus. 320th Battalion, prepare to disembark. The order rang out across the deck. Jefferson and his fellow soldiers moved toward the landing craft with practiced precision. The metal ramp of the LCVP, landing craft vehicle personnel, clanged down, and they began boarding the small vessel that would carry them to shore. Colonel Eugene Goodman, the white commander of their unit, gave last-minute instructions. "Remember your training. The 320th has a critical mission. Those barrage balloons need to be deployed as quickly as possible to protect the beachhead from enemy aircraft. Medics will establish aid stations behind the primary seawall. Good luck, men." What Colonel Goodman didn't say, what everyone already knew, was that the 320th was making history. Despite the segregated military, despite being relegated primarily to service and support roles, these men were about to be among the first Americans to set foot on French soil in the largest amphibious invasion in military history. The landing craft lurched forward, beginning its journey toward Omaha Beach. The 11-mile crossing seemed to stretch for an eternity. Jefferson gripped the side rail, watching as the coastline grew larger. The sound of the naval barrage was now punctuated by the sharp crack of German 88mm guns returning fire. Staff Sergeant James Howard, the senior non-commissioned officer in Jefferson's section, moved through the crowded landing craft. "Listen up. Intelligence says we're facing elements of the 352nd Infantry Division, not the static garrison troops we expected. They're combat veterans from the Eastern Front. This is going to be hot." Jefferson exchanged glances with Williams. This was unwelcome news. The original intelligence had suggested they would face the 716th Static Infantry Division, comprised largely of older men and Eastern European conscripts with low combat effectiveness. The 352nd was an entirely different proposition. 2 minutes to beach," called the coxswain. Jefferson closed his eyes briefly and said a silent prayer. His hands went through an automatic inventory of his medical supplies, bandages, sulfur powder, plasma, morphine, tourniquets. In his pocket was something extra, a small kit of his own design containing modified instruments he had been developing during training. His commanding officers had dismissed it as unnecessary, even ridiculous. "Stick to the approved medical protocols, Private Jefferson," they had said. But something told him those protocols might not be enough for what awaited them. The landing craft rocked violently as German artillery found its range. Shells exploded in the water nearby, sending geysers of seawater crashing over them. Then came the distinctive sound of machine gun fire, the German MG-42s, capable of firing 200 rounds per minute. The soldiers called it Hitler's buzzsaw for the unique ripping sound it made. "Down ramp! Move! Move! Move!" The front of the landing craft dropped, and instantly 2 men at the front were cut down by machine gun fire. Without thinking, Jefferson moved forward to help them, but Sergeant Howard grabbed his arm. "Not yet, medic. You die on this ramp, and how many others die without your help? Move to the seawall first." The logic was brutal but correct. Jefferson plunged into the waist-deep water, following his unit toward the beach. The water around them erupted with bullet impacts. Men screamed as they were hit. Jefferson focused on moving forward, one step at a time, his medic's bag held high above the water. Oberstleutnant Lieutenant Colonel Friedrich Siegelmann of the 352nd Infantry Division observed the Allied landing through his field glasses from Widerstandsnest 62, a fortified position overlooking what the Americans would designate as Omaha Beach. At 46, Siegelmann was a veteran of both the Polish and Russian campaigns. The weather had been their ally this morning. The rough seas had clearly disrupted the Americans' landing schedule. "The first wave is disorganized, Herr Oberstleutnant," reported his adjutant, Hauptmann Captain Werner Keller. "The naval bombardment missed most of our fortified positions." "As expected," Siegelmann replied. "Their intelligence is poor. They don't know we've moved the 352nd into position. Continue withholding the 88s until more landing craft are committed." Siegelmann had deployed his forces according to Field Marshal Rommel's defensive philosophy: meet the enemy at the water's edge with overwhelming firepower. His men were well entrenched in concrete bunkers and fighting positions covering the entire beach approach. Interlocking fields of fire from machine guns, mortars positioned to drop shells precisely on the beach exits, and artillery pre-registered on likely landing zones, all were ready. "Sir, there appear to be colored troops among the Americans," Keller noted with surprise. Siegelmann lowered his binoculars. "It makes no difference, they die the same as any other. Signal the batteries to commence firing." Within seconds, the German artillery opened up with a thunderous barrage. 80mm shells arced toward the incoming landing craft, while MG-42 machine guns swept the beach with deadly fire. Back at the water's edge, Jefferson had made it to the relative shelter of a Czech hedgehog, one of the metal anti-tank obstacles the Germans had placed along the beach. All around him, men from various units struggled to advance under intense fire. The carefully planned assault was unraveling in the face of unexpected resistance. "Medic! We need a medic over here!" The cry came from a cluster of men pinned down behind a disabled Sherman tank that had somehow made it ashore. Jefferson took a deep breath, checked to ensure his Red Cross armband was visible, and sprinted toward them. German doctrine officially respected the Geneva Conventions regarding medical personnel, but in the chaos of combat, a medic's Red Cross was just another target. Behind the tank, he found 3 wounded men from the 1st Infantry Division, the Big Red one. One had a leg wound, another had taken shrapnel to his shoulder, but the third was in critical condition with a sucking chest wound. "I'm PFC Jefferson, 320th Battalion Medic," he introduced himself, already working to assess the chest wound. "What's your name, soldier?" "P. Parker," the man gasped. "Can't breathe right." "I'm going to help you with that," Jefferson assured him, pulling supplies from his bag. The standard procedure for a sucking chest wound was to apply an airtight bandage, but Jefferson could see that the standard approach wouldn't work here. The wound was too large, and Parker was already showing signs of tension pneumothorax, air trapped in the chest cavity that would eventually collapse his lung and push his heart against the other lung. Jefferson reached into his pocket and pulled out his personal kit. Inside was a modified syringe with a one-way valve mechanism he had crafted from rubber tubing and metal parts salvaged from discarded medical equipment. "What the hell is that?" asked one of the other wounded men. "Something that might save his life," Jefferson replied. He quickly cleaned the area around the wound, inserted the modified device, and secured it with tape and bandages from his standard kit. Almost immediately, Parker's breathing eased as air escaped from his chest cavity without allowing more to enter. "That's not standard issue," noted a voice behind him. Jefferson turned to see Captain Robert Sullivan, a physician with the 1st Medical Battalion, who had made his way to their position. "No, sir, it's not," Jefferson admitted. "But it works. It's a modified chest decompression device with a one-way valve. Prevents tension pneumothorax while allowing continued drainage." Sullivan studied the improvised device with professional interest. "Where did you learn this technique?" "I didn't, sir. I developed it during training. Our instructors at Fort Bragg called it ridiculous, said it would never work in field conditions." Sullivan checked Parker's vital signs, noting the immediate improvement. "Well, Private, it seems to be working now. How many of these devices do you have?" "Just 3, sir. I could only smuggle so many components off the base." Sullivan nodded thoughtfully. "Stay with these men until a collection team can move them to the aid station. Then find me at the main medical station we're setting up behind that seawall. I want to see more of these devices of yours." As Captain Sullivan moved on to other wounded, Jefferson continued treating the remaining men. The beach was now in complete chaos. Landing craft continued to disgorge men directly into withering fire. Bodies floated in the rising tide or lay motionless on the sand. Equipment burned, and the air was filled with the sounds of combat, the crack of rifles, the hammering of machine guns, the screams of the wounded, and the constant thunder of naval gunfire and German artillery. By 0900 hours, Jefferson had made multiple trips across the exposed beach, treating wounded men from various units. His medical supplies were running low, but his 3 special chest devices had all been successfully deployed, saving the lives of men with severe thoracic injuries that would have been fatal under normal field conditions. Behind the relative protection of the seawall, Lieutenant Colonel Walter Simmons of the 16th Infantry Regiment was attempting to reorganize the scattered units. Men from different divisions, companies, and platoons had become mixed together in the landing chaos. "We need to get off this beach," Simmons told his gathered officers. "We're pinned down here and taking casualties we can't afford." "Sir," spoke up a captain from the 1st Engineer Special Brigade, "we've got Bangalore torpedoes ready to clear paths through the wire, but we need covering fire on those machine gun nests." Simmons nodded. "Get every available bar and machine gun team in position. We'll provide covering fire for the engineers. Once they blow gaps in the wire, we push through and take those bunkers one by one." As the officers dispersed to their units, Captain Sullivan approached Simmons. "Colonel, I need to speak with you about a medical matter." "Unless it helps us get off this beach, Doctor, it can wait," Simmons replied tersely. "It might help us save more of the men who are going to be wounded taking those positions," Sullivan countered. This got Simmons' attention. "What is it?" "One of the medics from the 320th, a colored outfit, has developed an improvised device for treating severe chest wounds. I've seen it work on 3 patients already. It's saving men who would otherwise die before reaching the aid stations." Simmons raised an eyebrow. "A colored medic invented this?" "Yes, sir. Private First Class Wilson Jefferson, and regardless of his color, his device works. I want authorization to have him demonstrate the technique to our other medics." Simmons considered for a moment. The beach was still under heavy fire, casualties were mounting, and they needed every advantage. "Fine, get it done quickly. We move on those bunkers in 20 minutes." In a hastily established aid station behind the seawall, Jefferson found himself surrounded by white medics and physicians from various units. Captain Sullivan had brought him here specifically to demonstrate his device. "Gentlemen, this is Private Jefferson from the 320th, Sullivan introduced him. "He's developed a field expedient method for treating tension pneumothorax that's showing remarkable results." The medical personnel looked skeptical, particularly as they took in Jefferson's appearance. His uniform was caked with blood and sand, his face streaked with sweat and grime, and he was black, something many of these men from segregated units were not accustomed to seeing in a position of expertise. "With respect, Captain," said one lieutenant from the medical corps, We have standard procedures for chest wounds, and they're failing us today, Sullivan replied bluntly. I've personally witnessed this technique save 3 men who would have died under our standard protocols. We lose nearly 40% of chest wound casualties because we can't get them to proper surgical facilities in time. Private Jefferson's method bridges that gap. Jefferson cleared his throat. Sir, if I may demonstrate. Sullivan nodded, and Jefferson laid out the components of his device on a medical table. Using spare parts, he showed them how to create the same one-way valve system. The principle is simple, he explained. A sucking chest wound creates an open pneumothorax. Air enters the pleural space with each breath, eventually collapsing the lung. If the wound acts as a one-way valve, air enters but can't escape, creating tension pneumothorax which can be rapidly fatal. His hands moved with practiced precision as he assembled a new device from components in his medical bag and items salvaged from standard equipment. This modified cannula with a one-way valve allows air to escape from the pleural space but prevents it from entering. It stabilizes the patient until surgical intervention is possible. A major who had been observing silently stepped forward to examine the device. Where did you learn this technique, Private? I developed it myself, sir. Before the war, I was studying pre-medicine at Howard University. I couldn't afford to continue, so I enlisted, but I kept reading medical journals whenever I could get them. The major turned to Sullivan. This is essentially a simplified version of what thoracic surgeons do in hospital settings, but I've never seen it adapted for field use like this. He paused, considering. It's unorthodox, but the principle is sound. Sullivan nodded. Exactly. And right now we need every advantage we can get. I propose we have Private Jefferson train our medics on this technique immediately. The sound of renewed artillery fire interrupted their discussion. The German batteries had found the range to the seawall, and shells began exploding nearby. We don't have much time, Sullivan said urgently. Our men are about to push inland and we're going to see a lot more casualties. I need every medic here to learn this technique now. For the next 15 minutes, Jefferson demonstrated his procedure to the assembled medical personnel. Some watched with professional interest, others with barely concealed skepticism or discomfort at taking instruction from a black soldier. Nevertheless, under the pressure of combat and with Sullivan's endorsement, they paid attention. The key is the valve mechanism, Jefferson explained, showing them how to create it from available materials. If you don't have rubber tubing, you can use sections from a plasma infusion set. The one-way flow can be created with this modified flap arrangement. As he finished his demonstration, the sound of Bangalore torpedoes exploding signaled the beginning of the push off the beach. Moments later, the distinctive sound of Thompson submachine guns and M1 Garand rifles indicated that American troops were on the move. That's our cue, gentlemen, Sullivan announced. Gather your supplies and prepare to move forward with your units and incorporate Private Jefferson's technique as needed. As the medics dispersed, Sullivan pulled Jefferson aside. You're going back to your unit now? Yes, sir. The 320th is deploying barrage balloons along the beachhead. They'll need medical support. Sullivan nodded. Your CO is going to hear about what you've done here today, Private. This could save a lot of lives. Jefferson returned to the 320th's position to find them successfully deploying the hydrogen-filled barrage balloons that would protect the beachhead from low-flying enemy aircraft. These silver balloons, tethered to the ground and floating at various altitudes, would force German planes to fly higher, making them easier targets for anti-aircraft guns and less accurate in their bombing runs. Sergeant Howard greeted him with a nod. There you are, Jefferson. Thought maybe you got hit. No, Sergeant. I was at the main aid station demonstrating my chest decompression device to some of the medical staff. Howard's eyebrows rose. That contraption you were always tinkering with? The one Captain Johnson called ridiculous? Yes, Sergeant. It's working well in field conditions. Howard shook his head with a wry smile. Well, I'll be damned. Good work, Jefferson. He pointed to where men were struggling with a barrage balloon in the strengthening wind. Now get over there and help with that balloon before it carries someone to France the quick way. By midday, the situation on Omaha Beach had begun to change. Small groups of determined American soldiers had pushed through gaps in the German defenses and begun working their way up the draws leading inland. Artillery observers who made it off the beach called in naval gunfire with increasing accuracy, silencing several German strongpoints. Jefferson moved with his unit, treating wounded men as they encountered them. Word of his improvised device had spread, and he found himself called upon specifically when soldiers with chest wounds were found. He had taught several other medics from the 320th how to create and use the device, multiplying its impact. Oberstleutnant Ziegelmann watched the changing tide of battle with growing concern. Despite inflicting heavy casualties on the Americans during their landing, they had established a foothold and were now pushing inland with increasing momentum. "Herr Oberstleutnant," reported Hauptmann Keller, "American forces have breached our positions at several points. They are moving up the draws toward Colleville and Saint-Laurent." "What about our counterattack elements?" Ziegelmann demanded. "The 915th Regiment cannot deploy due to Allied naval gunfire. Communications with division headquarters are intermittent at best." Ziegelmann considered their options. The defensive plan relied on stopping the Allies at the water's edge. Now that they had established a beachhead, the situation was becoming precarious. "Order a fighting withdrawal to the secondary defensive line," he finally decided. "We cannot afford to lose more men in static positions. We will counterattack once we have consolidated our forces." As the German forces began a tactical retreat from their frontline positions, American troops pushed further inland. The 320th Battalion moved their barrage balloons forward, establishing a protective canopy over the expanding beachhead. Jefferson found himself working alongside Navy Corpsman Richard Lewis at an impromptu aid station near the village of Saint-Laurent. Lewis, a white medic who had seen Jefferson's demonstration earlier, had already used the technique on 2 wounded Marines. "Your device saved both of them," Lewis told Jefferson as they worked together on a soldier with multiple shrapnel wounds. One had a wound that would have been fatal within minutes under normal circumstances. Jefferson nodded, focused on bandaging the soldier's injuries. "That's why I developed it. Too many men were dying before they could reach proper medical facilities." "Where'd you learn medicine?" Lewis asked. "Started at Howard University but couldn't afford to finish. Learned a lot on my own, reading whatever medical journals I could find. Then basic medical training in the Army, though they don't teach much beyond first aid to medics in colored units." Lewis looked surprised. "You figured all this out on your own?" "Necessity is a powerful motivator," Jefferson replied simply. As evening approached, the beachhead had been secured, though at terrible cost. The casualty figures were still being calculated, but early estimates suggested thousands of American dead, wounded, and missing. The 320th Battalion had suffered relatively light casualties compared to the infantry units, but they had still lost men during the landing and subsequent push inland. Jefferson sat exhausted on an ammunition crate, eating cold K rations as the sun began to set. Captain Sullivan found him there. "Jefferson, I've been looking for you," Sullivan said, sitting down beside him. "I've spoken with Colonel Taylor of the 16th Infantry and your commanding officer, Colonel Goodman. We've been compiling reports from the aid stations." Jefferson looked up, too tired to stand at attention. "Sir, based on preliminary accounts, your chest decompression device has been used on at least 27 men with severe thoracic injuries today. 23 of them have survived long enough to reach the field hospitals." The significance of these numbers was not lost on Jefferson. The survival rate for such injuries under standard field treatment was less than 30%. His device had pushed it above 80%. "That's good to hear, sir." "Good? It's remarkable," Sullivan corrected him. "I've written a detailed report for the Army Medical Corps, with a strong recommendation that your device be evaluated for standard field use." He paused. "I've also recommended you for a commendation." Jefferson shook his head. "That's not necessary, sir. I was just doing my job." "You did far more than your job, Private. You innovated when innovation was needed most. That's worth recognizing." Before Jefferson could respond, they were interrupted by the arrival of a jeep. A colonel from the 1st Infantry Division stepped out and approached them. "Captain Sullivan?" the colonel asked. Sullivan stood and saluted. "Yes, sir." "I'm Colonel Robert Sink. I understand you have a medic who's developed a new treatment for chest wounds." Sullivan gestured to Jefferson, who had now risen to his feet and stood at attention. "This is Private First Class Wilson Jefferson, sir. He's the one who developed the device." Colonel Sink looked surprised to see a black soldier, but quickly recovered. At ease, Private. I've just come from the field hospital. The surgeons there are quite impressed with the patients coming in with your device. They say you've essentially performed the initial stage of thoracic surgery right on the battlefield. Thank you, sir, Jefferson replied, uncomfortable with the praise. I've spoken with General Hubner, Sink continued. He wants this technique taught to all medics in the division as quickly as possible. Captain Sullivan tells me you've already begun training others. Yes, sir. It's a relatively simple procedure once you understand the principle. Sink nodded approvingly. Good. Captain Sullivan will coordinate a formal training program beginning tomorrow. In the meantime, get some rest. You've earned it. As Colonel Sink departed, Jefferson turned to Sullivan with a puzzled expression. Sir, why is a colonel taking an interest in a medical technique developed by a private? Sullivan smiled. Because right now, Jefferson, your device is saving more lives than anything else on this beach. In war, results matter more than rank or race, at least sometimes. As night fell over Normandy, Jefferson finally found time to write in the small journal he kept in his breast pocket. By the light of a shielded flashlight, he recorded the day's events, focusing particularly on the performance of his device in actual combat conditions. These notes, he hoped, would help him refine the design and technique. June 6, 1944. Omaha Beach device performed beyond expectations in field conditions. 23 of 27 patients with severe thoracic trauma survived to reach field hospital. Key improvements needed. 1. Simplify valve mechanism for faster deployment. 2. Develop method for securing device that withstands patient movement during evacuation. 3. Standardize components to allow for easier field assembly. Captain Sullivan recommends formal evaluation by Medical Corps. Demonstrated technique to approx. 15 medics from various units. Still in disbelief that something the instructors called ridiculous at Fort Bragg is now being requested by a general. As he finished writing, Jefferson heard someone approach. It was Marcus Williams, the other medic from his unit. There you are, Jeff, Williams said, sitting down heavily beside him. Been hearing stories about you all day. They're saying you invented something that's saving lives all over the beach. Jefferson closed his journal. It's not that dramatic. Just a modification to existing techniques. Williams shook his head. Not what I heard. Sergeant Howard says a colonel came looking specifically for you. Said your device is being used in every aid station on the beachhead. It's useful in certain situations. Jefferson admitted. But it's just one tool among many. Don't downplay it, Williams insisted. Do you know how rare it is for someone like us to get recognition for anything in this man's army? You should be proud. Jefferson considered this. As a black soldier in a segregated military, he was accustomed to having his contributions overlooked or minimized. The interest his device had generated was unusual, to say the least. I just want to help the wounded, he said finally. Everything else is secondary. Well, you're doing that and more, Williams replied. Rumor has it they're already calling it the Jefferson device at the field hospital. Jefferson smiled despite himself. Now I know you're exaggerating. Maybe a little, Williams admitted with a grin, but not by much. Get some sleep, Jeff. Tomorrow's going to be another long day. As Williams walked away, Jefferson leaned back against a supply crate and looked up at the stars. Despite the exhaustion and the horrors he had witnessed, there was a sense of satisfaction in knowing his idea, the one dismissed as ridiculous during training, had proven its worth when it mattered most. Dawn on June 7th brought renewed activity as reinforcements and supplies poured onto the beachhead. The 320th Battalion continued deploying their barrage balloons, now protecting a substantially larger area as American forces pushed further inland. Jefferson, having gotten a few hours of restless sleep, was summoned to the main field hospital that had been established just beyond the beach. There, he found Captain Sullivan waiting with several high-ranking medical officers. Jefferson, good timing, Sullivan greeted him. These gentlemen are from the Army Medical Corps. They'd like to discuss your chest decompression device. The senior officer, a colonel with Medical Corps insignia, stepped forward. Private Jefferson, I'm Colonel Howard Mitchell, Chief Surgical Consultant for the European Theater. We've been reviewing the reports about your improvised treatment for tension pneumothorax. Jefferson stood at attention. Yes, sir. At ease, Private, Mitchell said. I've personally examined several patients treated with your device. The results are impressive, particularly given the field conditions under which it was applied. Thank you, sir, Mitchell continued. We'd like you to give us a complete demonstration and explanation of the device. We're considering implementing it as a standard protocol for combat medics, pending further evaluation. For the next hour, Jefferson demonstrated his device to the assembled medical officers, explaining the principles behind it, the materials required, and the techniques for proper insertion and management. The officers asked detailed questions, taking notes and occasionally conferring among themselves. The genius of Private Jefferson's approach, Sullivan explained to the group, is its simplicity. It uses components already available in standard medical kits, repurposed in a novel way. It's also teachable to combat medics with minimal advanced training. Colonel Mitchell nodded thoughtfully. The concept is similar to procedures we perform in thoracic surgery, but I've never seen it adapted for emergency field use like this. It's quite ingenious. Another officer, a major, raised a concern. What about the risk of infection? Inserting any device into the pleural space carries significant risks. Jefferson addressed this directly. Sir, the primary risk to these patients is immediate death from tension pneumothorax. My device buys them time to reach surgical facilities. The infection risk is real but secondary, and can be mitigated with proper wound cleaning and prophylactic antibiotics upon reaching the field hospital. The major seemed impressed by this response. You sound more like a physician than a combat medic, Private. I studied pre-medicine before the war, sir, Jefferson explained, and I've continued my education whenever possible. As the demonstration concluded, Colonel Mitchell pulled Sullivan and Jefferson aside. Captain, I want this technique documented in detail. Have Private Jefferson write up complete instructions and specifications. We'll begin evaluating it for possible inclusion in the standard medical protocols. Sullivan saluted. Yes, sir, I'll see to it immediately. After the medical officers departed, Sullivan turned to Jefferson with a broad smile. Do you understand what just happened? Colonel Mitchell rarely takes a personal interest in field innovations. If he supports your device, it could become standard practice throughout the European theater. Jefferson was still processing the implications. Sir, I just wanted to help the wounded. And you have, Sullivan assured him. But this could go much further. This could change how we treat thoracic trauma on battlefields everywhere. Back with his unit, Jefferson found himself the center of unexpected attention. Word of his meeting with the medical corps officers had spread, and even men who had previously kept their distance due to racial prejudice were now curious about the medic whose invention was saving lives. Lieutenant James Cooper, the white officer commanding Jefferson's platoon, approached him as he checked supplies in the aid station. Jefferson, a word? Cooper said. Yes, sir, Jefferson replied, setting aside the bandages he was organizing. I've been hearing a lot about this medical device of yours, Cooper began somewhat awkwardly. Captain Sullivan tells me it's quite remarkable. It's just a practical solution to a specific problem, sir, Cooper nodded. Well, practical solutions are what win wars. I wanted to commend you for your initiative. This was unexpected. Cooper had never been overtly hostile, but like many white officers commanding black troops, he had maintained a cool professional distance that made his racial attitudes clear enough. Thank you, Certain Jefferson replied simply. Cooper seemed to struggle with what to say next. I understand you had medical training before the war. I was studying to become a doctor, sir. Didn't get to finish. After seeing what you've accomplished here, I'd say that's a loss for the medical profession, Cooper said, surprising Jefferson further. Carry on, Private. As Cooper walked away, Sergeant Howard appeared beside Jefferson. Will wonders never cease, Howard remarked quietly. Guess saving white boys' lives makes them see things a little differently. Maybe, Jefferson replied. Or maybe war just has a way of cutting through the nonsense. Howard chuckled. Don't get too optimistic. One invention, no matter how good, isn't going to change how things are back home. His expression grew more serious. But it's something, and sometimes something is enough to start bigger changes. Throughout the day, Jefferson divided his time between his regular duties with the 320th Battalion and training sessions with medics from various units. Under Captain Sullivan's coordination, he taught his technique to dozens of medical personnel who would carry it to their respective units. At the field hospital, the surgical team had begun formally documenting the outcomes of patients treated with Jefferson's device. The initial results were compelling. A significant increase in survival rates for patients with severe thoracic trauma who would otherwise have died before reaching surgical care. Major William Randall, chief thoracic surgeon at the field hospital, had taken a particular interest in the device. After operating on several patients who had arrived stabilized by Jefferson's technique, he sought out the medic personally. "Private Jefferson," Randall greeted him during one of the training sessions. "I wanted to meet the man behind this innovation. Your device gave me viable patients instead of corpses today." Jefferson, still uncomfortable with the attention, nodded respectfully. "Thank you, sir. I'm glad it's helping." "Helping doesn't begin to describe it," Randall continued. "I've been a thoracic surgeon for 15 years. The principle you've applied is sound medicine, creating a one-way valve to release trapped air while preventing more from entering. But adapting it for emergency field use, that's the kind of thinking we desperately need more of." As Randall spoke, a commotion at the hospital entrance drew their attention. A group of stretcher-bearers rushed in with newly wounded men from an engagement several miles inland. "Chest wound, tension pneumothorax," called one of the medics accompanying them. "Treated with the Jefferson device 30 minutes ago." Jefferson and Randall exchanged glances at the unexpected nomenclature. The name had apparently stuck. "Seems you've been immortalized, Private," Randall remarked with a smile. "Come, let's see how your namesake is performing." They moved to where the wounded soldier, a young lieutenant from the 29th Infantry Division, was being assessed. The modified chest tube Jefferson had designed was clearly visible, secured to his chest with medical tape and bandages. Despite the severity of his wound, the lieutenant was conscious and his vital signs were stable. "Impressive," Randall commented, examining the device. "This is good work." The attending physician looked up. "Are you Jefferson?" he asked, noticing the private standing with Major Randall. "Yes, sir." "Your device may have saved this man's life. The medic who applied it said he was in severe distress before insertion, with decreasing consciousness and cyanosis. After placement, he stabilized within minutes." Jefferson felt a wave of satisfaction that transcended the awkwardness of the attention. This was why he had joined the medical corps, to save lives, regardless of the circumstances. As the day progressed, Jefferson continued training medics, while also performing his regular duties with the 320th. The battalion's primary mission, deploying and maintaining barrage balloons to protect the beachhead from enemy aircraft, remained critical to the ongoing operation. By evening, the expanded American foothold in Normandy was becoming more secure. The desperate fighting of D-Day had given way to a steady advance inland, though German resistance remained fierce in many areas. Captain Sullivan found Jefferson as he finished treating a soldier with a minor shrapnel wound. "Jefferson, do you have a moment?" "Of course, sir." Sullivan led him away from the aid station to a quieter area. "I've just come from a meeting with Colonel Mitchell and the division medical staff. They've made a decision about your device." Jefferson waited expectantly. "They're implementing it immediately throughout the beachhead," Sullivan continued. "Every combat medic in the First Army is being instructed in the technique. They're calling it, and I quote, a significant advancement in battlefield trauma care." Jefferson absorbed this news with mixed emotions. Pride in the recognition of his work warred with the knowledge that such recognition wouldn't have come so quickly, if at all, in peacetime. "There's more," Sullivan added. "Colonel Mitchell has recommended you for the Bronze Star with V device for valor." This was truly unexpected. "Sir, I didn't do anything valorous. I just applied a medical technique." "You did much more than that. Jefferson, you took fire on that beach like everyone else. You treated the wounded under combat conditions, and you implemented an innovation that saved dozens of lives already. That meets the criteria for the medal." Jefferson shook his head, still processing. "Sir, no disrespect intended, but we both know colored soldiers rarely receive such recognition." Sullivan's expression tightened slightly. "I won't pretend the recommendation is guaranteed approval, but Mitchell has significant influence, and the results of your work are undeniable. Sometimes, even in a segregated army, Merit finds a way. Before Jefferson could respond, they were interrupted by a messenger. Captain Sullivan, sir, you're needed at the field hospital immediately. German counterattack near Saint-Laurent has resulted in multiple casualties. Sullivan nodded. I'll be right there. He turned back to Jefferson. We'll continue this discussion later. For now, your primary duty remains with the 320th, but if the hospital needs your expertise, you're authorized to provide it. As Sullivan hurried away, Jefferson returned to his unit's position. The 320th had established a perimeter around their barrage balloons, with men rotating through guard duty to protect against potential infiltrators or saboteurs. Sergeant Howard approached as Jefferson checked his medical supplies. Just heard about the Bronze Star recommendation, Howard said quietly. Word travels fast around here. Jefferson looked up in surprise. How did you hear about that already? Lieutenant Cooper mentioned it to the platoon sergeants, Howard replied with a slight smile. Seems he's rather proud to have a decorated medic in his platoon, even if you are colored. Jefferson shook his head. The recommendation doesn't mean it will happen, Sarge. Maybe not, Howard conceded. But the fact that they're even considering it says something. And more importantly, that device of yours is saving lives all up and down the beachhead now. That's something no one can take away from you. As night fell on June 7th, the situation in Normandy remained tenuous but improving. American forces had pushed several miles inland in some sectors, though German resistance remained stubborn. The 320th Battalion's barrage balloons floated serenely above the beachhead, silver sentinels protecting the vital supply lines now flowing from ships to shore. Jefferson sat with Williams and several other men from their unit, sharing K rations and coffee as they discussed the day's events. So what are they going to call this thing officially? Williams asked. The Jefferson device has a nice ring to it, Jefferson chuckled. I doubt they'll name it after a private, much less a colored one. Don't be so sure, countered Corporal Davis, another member of their unit. I overheard some brass talking about it. They're already using the name informally. Doesn't matter what they call it, Jefferson replied, as long as it works and saves lives. As they talked, a jeep approached their position. To everyone's surprise, Colonel Eugene Goodman, commander of the 320th Battalion, stepped out. The men scrambled to attention. At ease, Goodman ordered. Private Jefferson, a word please. Jefferson followed the colonel a short distance away. Goodman was a career officer who treated his black troops with professional courtesy but little warmth. Jefferson, I've been hearing quite a lot about you today, Goodman began. Captain Sullivan has briefed me on your medical innovation and its impact. Yes, sir. Goodman studied him for a moment. I understand you developed this device during training and were told it was ridiculous, is that correct? Yes, sir. Several instructors at Fort Bragg felt it was unnecessary and impractical. And yet you persisted. Jefferson chose his words carefully. I believed it would be useful in combat conditions, sir. The standard protocols for thoracic trauma have significant limitations in field settings. Goodman nodded slowly. I've commanded colored troops for nearly 3 years now, Jefferson. In that time, I've observed that initiative is often discouraged in your ranks, sometimes by white officers, sometimes by the system itself. This was more direct acknowledgement of racial dynamics than Jefferson had ever heard from a white officer. Goodman continued, what I'm trying to say, somewhat inelegantly, is that your persistence in the face of dismissal represents the kind of thinking we need more of, from soldiers of any color. He cleared his throat. The 320th is proud to have you in our ranks, Private. Thank you, sir, Jefferson replied, genuinely surprised by the colonel's words. That will be all, Goodman concluded, returning to his more typical formal demeanor. Carry on. As the colonel departed, Jefferson rejoined his comrades, who looked at him with curious expressions. What was that about? Williams asked. Jefferson shook his head slightly. The colonel wanted to express his appreciation for the medical device. Must be more than that, Williams pressed. Goodman doesn't personally congratulate privates for anything. Before Jefferson could respond, the distant sound of German artillery interrupted their conversation. Moments later, explosions erupted several hundred yards away, near one of the beach exits. Incoming! Shouted Sergeant Howard. Everyone to your positions. The men scattered to their defensive positions as more shells landed nearby. Jefferson grabbed his medical bag and prepared to respond to casualties. Within minutes, reports of wounded came in from various points around the perimeter. Jefferson and Williams moved quickly to the nearest site, where 2 men had been hit by shell fragments. As they worked to stabilize the wounded, the German barrage continued, seemingly targeting the areas where barrage balloons were concentrated. One shell landed close enough to shower them with dirt and debris. "They're trying to take out our balloons," Williams shouted over the noise. "Luftwaffe must be planning a raid." Jefferson focused on applying a pressure bandage to a soldier's wounded arm. "Let's just concentrate on keeping these men alive." Throughout the night, the German artillery bombardment continued intermittently. Jefferson moved from position to position, treating wounded men and coordinating evacuation to the field hospital when necessary. By dawn on June 8th, the 320th had suffered 12 wounded and 3 killed, but their barrage balloons remained intact, a testament to the unit's determination. As morning light revealed the new day, Jefferson finally took a moment to rest, slumping against a supply crate with exhaustion etched on his face. Captain Sullivan found him there. "Jefferson, when was the last time you slept?" Jefferson tried to recall. "Grabbed a few hours the night before last, sir." "That's not sufficient," Sullivan admonished. "You're relieved of duty for the next 6 hours. Get some sleep. Doctor's orders." Too tired to argue, Jefferson nodded. "Yes, sir." "Before you go," Sullivan added, "I wanted to let you know, we used your device on 17 more casualties during last night's bombardment. 15 survived to reach surgery. The thoracic surgeons at the field hospital are calling it a game changer for battlefield medicine." Despite his exhaustion, Jefferson felt a surge of satisfaction. "That's good to hear, sir." "More than good, Jefferson. It's extraordinary. Now get some rest. Your innovation is saving lives, but you can't help anyone if you collapse from exhaustion." Jefferson found a relatively quiet corner in one of the supply tents and promptly fell into a deep sleep. He dreamed of Howard University, of the medical classes he had attended before financial reality had forced him to abandon his education. In the dream, he was presenting his chest decompression device to a lecture hall filled with prestigious physicians, all of whom were listening with rapt attention to a young black medical student. He awoke 6 hours later to find Sergeant Howard standing over him. "Time to rejoin the living, Jefferson. Captain Sullivan's looking for you." Jefferson sat up, still groggy but feeling somewhat restored. "What's happening, Sarge?" "The Krauts launched a counterattack near Carentan. Got pushed back, but there are a lot of casualties. Sullivan says they need your expertise at the field hospital." Within minutes, Jefferson was in a jeep heading toward the expanded field hospital that now served as the primary medical facility for the beachhead. The scene that greeted him was one of organized chaos. Wounded men being brought in on stretchers, medical personnel moving purposefully between treatment areas, the air filled with the sounds of pain and urgent medical orders. Captain Sullivan met him at the entrance. "Jefferson, good. We've got multiple thoracic trauma cases incoming. Major Randall requested you specifically." "Me, sir. But I'm not a surgeon." "No, but you understand your device better than anyone. Randall wants you to assist with the most critical cases, applying the device and monitoring its function while he performs more complex procedures." This was unprecedented, a black combat medic being requested to assist a white major in surgery. But war created its own necessities, its own exceptions to the rigid segregation that defined military life. In the surgical tent, Major Randall was already working on a soldier with a severe chest wound. He looked up as Jefferson entered. "Jefferson, good. I need your expertise here. This man has multiple shell fragments in his thoracic cavity. I've removed what I can, but he's developing tension pneumothorax despite our standard interventions." Jefferson moved quickly to the operating table, surveying the situation. The wounded soldier, a captain from the 29th Infantry, had a gaping wound in his right chest that had been partially closed by Randall. But air was clearly accumulating in the pleural space, compressing the lung and putting pressure on the heart. "I see the problem, sir," Jefferson said, examining the wound. "There's a small tear here that's acting as a one-way valve, trapping air in the pleural space. Standard chest tubes aren't positioned optimally for this specific injury. Randall nodded. That's my assessment as well. I need you to place your device with the modified valve precisely at this location. He indicated a spot near the wound margin. With steady hands that belied his lack of formal surgical training, Jefferson prepared his device and carefully inserted it into the designated position. Almost immediately, there was an audible release of trapped air, and the patient's vital signs began to improve. "Excellent placement," Randall commented, continuing with his procedure. "Now I can focus on repairing the deeper tissue damage without worrying about the pneumothorax progressing." For the next several hours, Jefferson worked alongside Randall and other surgeons, applying his device to the most critical thoracic trauma cases. The racial boundaries that would have made such collaboration unthinkable in peacetime seemed to dissolve in the urgent environment of the field hospital. During a brief break, Randall pulled Jefferson aside. "Your device is performing remarkably well under actual surgical conditions. I've been taking notes on each case for a formal report to the surgical division of the medical corps." "Thank you, sir," Jefferson replied, still somewhat uncomfortable with the attention. "I'm just glad it's helping." "It's doing more than helping," Randall insisted. "It's saving lives that would otherwise be lost." He paused, studying Jefferson with professional interest. "You said you had some medical training before the war." 2 years of pre-medicine at Howard University, sir." "I had to withdraw for financial reasons." Randall nodded thoughtfully. "When this war is over, you should consider completing your education. The field needs minds like yours." Before Jefferson could respond, a nurse interrupted them. "Major, more casualties arriving from the Saint Laurent sector." "Back to work," Randall said with a sigh. "Jefferson, I need you at table 3. We have another complex thoracic case." By the end of the day, Jefferson had assisted with over a dozen surgical procedures, applying his device and helping manage the most critical thoracic injuries. The experience was invaluable, like a compressed medical education conducted under the most extreme conditions imaginable. As the flow of casualties finally began to subside, Captain Sullivan found Jefferson washing up outside the surgical tent. "You've made quite an impression on the surgical team," Sullivan remarked. "Major Randall says you have a natural aptitude for thoracic procedures." Jefferson dried his hands on a towel. "It's been an educational experience, sir." "I imagine so," Sullivan agreed. "By the way, I've been authorized to tell you that your Bronze Star recommendation has been approved at the division level. It's now moving up the chain of command." Jefferson nodded, still uncertain how to feel about the recognition. Part of him was proud that his contribution was being acknowledged. Another part remained skeptical that such recognition would ultimately be granted to a black soldier. Sullivan seemed to read his thoughts. "I know what you're thinking, Jefferson, and you're right that the Army doesn't have a great track record when it comes to recognizing the contributions of Negro troops. But this is different. Your device has saved too many lives to be ignored." "I hope you're right, sir," Jefferson replied. "But either way, knowing it's helping is enough for me." Sullivan smiled slightly. "That attitude is probably why you deserve the medal in the first place." As Jefferson returned to the 320th position that evening, he found the mood among his fellow soldiers had changed subtly. Word of his work at the field hospital had spread throughout the unit, creating a sense of pride that transcended the normal boundaries of race and rank. Corporal Davis greeted him with a respectful nod. "Heard you were working miracles at the hospital, Jefferson." "No miracles," Jefferson corrected him, "just applied medicine." "Whatever you call it, the whole unit's talking about it. Even some of the white officers from other battalions have been asking about the medic from the 320th with the chest device." As they spoke, Lieutenant Cooper approached. "Jefferson, a moment of your time." "Yes, sir," Jefferson replied, following the lieutenant a short distance away. "I've just come from a meeting with Colonel Goodman," Cooper began. "The 320th is being recognized for our performance during the landing. The colonel made special mention of your contribution to the medical effort." Jefferson nodded. "Thank you for informing me, sir." Cooper hesitated, then added, "I also wanted to say something personally. When I was first assigned to command a platoon in a colored unit, I had certain preconceptions. Your actions these past few days have challenged those preconceptions. I wanted to acknowledge that. This was perhaps the closest thing to an apology for racial prejudice that Jefferson had ever heard from a white officer. "I appreciate that, sir." "Carry on, Private," Cooper concluded, clearly uncomfortable with the conversation, but having said what he felt needed to be said. As Cooper walked away, Williams appeared beside Jefferson. "What was that about?" he asked. Jefferson shrugged. "Lieutenant Cooper is reassessing some of his assumptions." Williams raised an eyebrow. "About colored troops?" "Something like that." Williams shook his head in wonder. "All because of a medical device?" "No," Jefferson replied thoughtfully. "Not because of the device itself, because of what it represents, the fact that innovation and expertise can come from unexpected sources. That sometimes the people you've been taught to underestimate might just surprise you." "Well," Williams said with a grin, "you've certainly surprised a lot of people these past few days." June 9th dawned with clearing skies and the distant sound of aircraft, Allied planes flying support missions for the troops pushing further into Normandy. The beachhead was now secure, with a steady stream of men and materials flowing ashore to support the expanding front. Jefferson spent the morning conducting a formal training session for medics from various units. Under Captain Sullivan's direction, he had developed a standardized protocol for the deployment of his chest decompression device, complete with illustrations and step-by-step instructions. "The key is proper placement," Jefferson explained to the assembled medics. "The device must be positioned to allow air to escape from the pleural space without permitting more to enter. In cases of multiple penetrating wounds, you may need to insert more than one device." A medic from the 4th Infantry Division raised his hand. "What if we don't have all the components you've specified?" Jefferson nodded, having anticipated this question. "That's why I've developed these alternative configurations using standard items from your medical kits." He demonstrated several variations of the device using different materials. The principle remains the same even if the specific components vary. Another medic, this one from the 29th Division, asked, "What's the success rate been so far?" Captain Sullivan answered this one. "Based on data from the field hospitals, approximately 85% of patients treated with the Jefferson device are surviving long enough to receive definitive surgical care. That compares to a historical survival rate of less than 30% for similar injuries under standard field treatment." As the training session continued, Jefferson noticed a group of high-ranking officers observing from the back of the tent. Among them was a brigadier general he didn't recognize, along with Colonel Mitchell from the Medical Corps. When the session concluded, Sullivan approached Jefferson. "The general would like to speak with you," he said quietly. Jefferson straightened his uniform as best he could and followed Sullivan to where the officers stood. "General Hawkins, this is Private First Class Wilson Jefferson," Sullivan introduced him. The brigadier general, a tall man with silver hair and the insignia of the Medical Corps on his collar, extended his hand, a gesture rarely offered to black enlisted men by generals. "Private Jefferson, I've heard a great deal about your innovation. Quite impressive." "Thank you, sir," Jefferson replied, shaking the general's hand briefly. "I've been reviewing the preliminary data on patient outcomes," General Hawkins continued. "Colonel Mitchell here tells me your device is showing remarkable results in field conditions." "The credit belongs to the medics and surgeons who are implementing it, sir," Jefferson responded. "I simply developed the initial concept." Hawkins smiled slightly. "Modesty is commendable, Private, but let's not minimize a significant contribution to battlefield medicine." He turned to Colonel Mitchell. "I want a complete report on the Jefferson device for the Surgeon General's office by the end of the week. This could have implications beyond the European theater." "Yes, sir," Mitchell replied. "We're already documenting all cases and outcomes." Hawkins returned his attention to Jefferson. "I understand you had medical training before the war. 2 years of pre-medicine at Howard University, sir." The general nodded thoughtfully. "The Army needs more men with your combination of practical innovation and theoretical understanding. Colonel Mitchell tells me you've been recommended for the Bronze Star." "So I've been informed, sir." "Well deserved from what I've seen," Hawkins stated. "I'll be adding my endorsement to the recommendation." He extended his hand again. "Congratulations, Private Jefferson. You've made a significant contribution to this invasion and potentially to military medicine as a whole." After the general and his entourage departed, Sullivan turned to Jefferson with a broad smile. Do you understand what just happened? General Hawkins is the Deputy Chief Medical Officer for the entire European theatre. His endorsement practically guarantees your Bronze Star. Jefferson was still processing the encounter. Sir, with all due respect, I'm having trouble believing any of this. 3 days ago I was just another colored medic in a segregated unit. Now generals are shaking my hand and talking about reports to the Surgeon General. Sullivan's expression grew more serious. I understand your skepticism, Jefferson. The Army's treatment of Negro troops has been less than equitable. But sometimes exceptional circumstances create opportunities for recognition that might not otherwise exist. Your device is saving the lives of men from every unit on this beachhead, white and colored alike. That transcends the usual boundaries. Throughout the day, Jefferson continued his regular duties with the 320th, while also supporting the ongoing medical training program. His device, now officially designated the Thoracic Decompression Device Type J in medical bulletins, though informally still called the Jefferson device by most medics, had been incorporated into the standard protocols for treating chest wounds throughout the beachhead. By evening, Jefferson found himself summoned once again to the field hospital, where Major Randall requested his assistance with several complex cases. The working relationship that had developed between them was unprecedented in Jefferson's experience. A white major treating a black private as a valued colleague rather than a subordinate. As they worked together on a particularly challenging thoracic injury, Randall spoke candidly about his observations. Your device has fundamentally changed our approach to these injuries, Jefferson. Before, we were losing most of these men before they even reached surgery. Now we have time to implement proper surgical interventions. Jefferson nodded, focused on adjusting the placement of the device in the wounded soldier's chest. That was the intention, sir, to bridge the critical gap between field care and definitive surgery. Well, it's working, Randall affirmed, and not just here. I've received reports from other field hospitals all along the beachhead. They're implementing your technique with similar results. As they completed the procedure, Randall added, I've been thinking about the broader applications. This approach could be valuable not just in military medicine, but in civilian emergency care as well. Rural areas, disaster scenarios, anywhere with limited access to immediate surgical facilities. Jefferson had considered this as well. The principle could be adapted to various settings, sir. The key is creating a functional one-way valve with whatever materials are available. Randall nodded thoughtfully. When we get back to the States, I'd like to collaborate with you on a formal paper for the Journal of Trauma Surgery. Your name as primary author, of course. This offer, extraordinary under normal circumstances and almost unheard of across racial lines, left Jefferson momentarily speechless. I would be honored, sir. Good, Randall said, as if the matter was settled. Now let's finish up here. We have more patients waiting. By June 10th, 4 days after the initial landings, the situation in Normandy had stabilized significantly. American forces had pushed several miles inland, establishing a solid foothold that would serve as the basis for the liberation of France. The 320th Barrage Balloon Battalion continued its mission of protecting critical areas from enemy aircraft, while also supporting the broader logistical effort. Jefferson found himself dividing his time between his regular duties with the 320th and increasing requests for his expertise at the medical facilities. His device had been formally adopted throughout the First Army, with training programs established to ensure all combat medics understood the technique. During a rare quiet moment, Jefferson took time to update his journal, documenting the developments of the past few days and his observations on the performance of his device under various conditions. June 10th, 1944. Normandy device, now designated Thoracic Decompression Device Type J in official bulletins. Being implemented throughout beachhead medical facilities, estimated 85% survival rate for patients with severe thoracic trauma when device is properly applied. Major Randall suggests potential civilian applications post-war. Bronze Star recommendation, progressing through chain of command. General Hawkins has added his endorsement. 320th continuing primary mission with barrage balloons, unit morale high. As he finished writing, Sergeant Howard approached. "Mail just came in, Jefferson. Letter for you." Jefferson accepted the slightly crumpled envelope, recognizing his mother's handwriting immediately. The letter had been written weeks ago, long before D-Day, but its arrival now seemed like a connection to another world, a reminder that beyond the beaches and battlefields of Normandy, normal life continued. Howard gave him some privacy, and Jefferson opened the letter carefully. "Dear Wilson, I pray this letter finds you safe and well. We are all thinking of you constantly here at home. Your father doesn't say much, but I catch him listening to the war news on the radio every night, especially any mention of where your unit might be deployed. The neighborhood has changed since you left. With so many men away at war, women are taking jobs in places that wouldn't hire them before. I'm now working at the Phillips factory 3 days a week, helping make equipment for the Navy. It feels good to be contributing to the war effort, knowing it might help bring you home sooner. Your old professor from Howard, Dr. Thompson, asked about you when I ran into him at church. He still says you were one of his most promising students and hopes you'll return to your studies after the war. I told him you were serving as a medic, and he said that experience would be invaluable if you decide to pursue medicine again. I keep your picture on the mantel and say a prayer for you each night. Whatever challenges you're facing, remember that you come from strong stock. Your grandfather survived slavery and built a good life. Your father endured the trenches of the last war and came home to raise a family. You have their strength in you. Be safe, son. Do your duty, help those you can, and come home to us when this is all over. All my love." Mother Jefferson folded the letter carefully and placed it in his breast pocket. The mention of Dr. Thompson and his pre-medicine studies felt like a message from another life, a reminder of dreams deferred but not forgotten. Later that day, Jefferson was conducting another training session for medics when Captain Sullivan arrived with unexpected news. "Jefferson," Sullivan called as the session was concluding. "A moment, please." Jefferson excused himself from the group of medics and joined Sullivan. "Yes, sir?" "I've just received word from Division Headquarters," Sullivan began, an unusual excitement in his voice. "Your Bronze Star has been officially approved. The presentation ceremony will be tomorrow morning at 900. Despite his earlier skepticism, Jefferson felt a surge of pride. "That's unexpected, sir." "Well deserved," Sullivan corrected. "And there's more. Colonel Mitchell has submitted a formal recommendation that your device be adopted as standard equipment for all combat medics in the European theater. The preliminary designation is the Thoracic Decompression Device Type J, the J standing for Jefferson. This was beyond anything Jefferson had anticipated. Having his name formally associated with the device in official Army medical protocols was unprecedented recognition for a black service member. "I don't know what to say, sir." "You don't need to say anything," Sullivan replied. "Your work speaks for itself. I'll send a jeep for you at 8:30 tomorrow for the ceremony." News of Jefferson's Bronze Star spread quickly through the 320th Battalion. That evening, his fellow soldiers organized an impromptu celebration at their position, sharing rare treats from their ration packs and offering heartfelt congratulations. "First Bronze Star in the whole battalion," Williams declared proudly. "And it goes to our own Jefferson." Sergeant Howard raised his coffee cup in a toast. "To Jefferson, proving that colored troops can do more than dig ditches and set up balloons." The men laughed and cheered, but there was truth behind Howard's words. Despite their critical role in the invasion, the 320th and other black units had been largely relegated to support functions, their contributions often overlooked or minimized in official accounts. "It's not just about me," Jefferson insisted. "It's about what we can all do when given the chance. This medal belongs to the entire 320th. Lieutenant Cooper, who had joined the celebration, shook his head. "No, Jefferson, this one's yours. You earned it." He hesitated, then added more quietly, "And you've taught some of us an important lesson in the process." The next morning, Jefferson found himself standing at attention before an assembled group of officers at the 1st Army Headquarters, which had been established in a captured German command post near Colville-sur-Mer. General Omar Bradley himself was presiding over the ceremony, which included recognition for several soldiers who had distinguished themselves during the landings. Private First Class Wilson Jefferson, announced the adjutant, reading from an official citation, for extraordinary heroism and meritorious achievement as a combat medic during the invasion of Normandy, June 6 to 10, 1944. Jefferson stepped forward as General Bradley approached with the Bronze Star Medal. Private Jefferson's innovative development of an emergency thoracic decompression device and his courage in implementing this life-saving technique under combat conditions resulted in the survival of numerous critically wounded soldiers who would otherwise have perished from their injuries. General Bradley pinned the medal to Jefferson's uniform. His technical expertise, commitment to duty, and unwavering dedication to the care of the wounded reflect great credit upon himself, the Medical Corps, and the United States Army. As Jefferson saluted and stepped back into formation, he noticed several war correspondents documenting the ceremony. Among them was a reporter he recognized, Edward R. Murrow, the famous CBS radio journalist whose broadcasts from London during the Blitz had made him a household name in America. After the ceremony, Murrow approached Jefferson while he was speaking with Captain Sullivan and Major Randall. "Private Jefferson," Murrow greeted him, extending his hand. "Edward R. Murrow, CBS News. I understand your medical innovation is saving lives all along the beachhead." Jefferson shook the correspondent's hand. "It's a team effort, sir. The medics and surgeons implementing the technique are the real heroes." Murrow smiled slightly. "That's not what the doctors tell me. May I ask you a few questions about your background and how you developed this device?" For the next several minutes, Jefferson explained his medical training at Howard University, his enlistment in the Army, and the development of his thoracic decompression device. Murrow listened attentively, occasionally making notes. "And you're with the 320th Barrage Balloon Battalion," Murrow confirmed. "One of the few Negro combat units in the invasion force." "Yes, sir. We're responsible for deploying and maintaining the barrage balloons that protect the beachhead from enemy aircraft." Murrow nodded thoughtfully. "A critical mission, though perhaps not as visible as some others." He seemed to consider something before continuing. "Private Jefferson, would you be willing to record a brief interview for broadcast? I think the American public would be interested in hearing about your medical innovation and the role of the 320th in this invasion." Jefferson glanced at Captain Sullivan, who nodded encouragingly. "If my commanding officers approve, sir, I'd be honored." "Excellent," Murrow replied. "I'll make the arrangements with your battalion commander." He shook Jefferson's hand again. "Your story represents an important aspect of this invasion that might otherwise go untold." After Murrow departed, Sullivan turned to Jefferson with a slight smile. "Looks like you're about to become famous, Private." Jefferson shook his head. "I doubt that, sir. More likely my part will be edited out when the broadcast reaches the States." "Don't be so sure," Sullivan replied. "Murrow has a reputation for integrity. If he says he wants to tell your story, he means it." The interview with Edward R. Murrow took place the following day at the 320th's position. Murrow's recording equipment was set up near one of the battalion's barrage balloons, providing a visual context for the radio audience through Murrow's vivid descriptions. "This is Edward R. Murrow reporting from Normandy," he began, his resonant voice carrying clearly, despite the ambient sounds of the beachhead. "I'm standing near the coast with Private First Class Wilson Jefferson of the 320th Barrage Balloon Battalion, one of the few Negro combat units participating in the invasion of Europe." Murrow turned to Jefferson. "Private Jefferson, you've recently been awarded the Bronze Star for developing a medical device that's saving lives here on the beachhead. Can you tell us about this innovation?" Jefferson spoke clearly into the microphone. "It's a modified chest decompression device, sir. It creates a one-way valve that allows air to escape from the pleural space in cases of tension pneumothorax, a life-threatening condition that occurs with certain chest wounds." "And how did you come to develop this device?" "During my training as a medic, I observed that the standard protocols for treating such injuries had significant limitations in field conditions. Drawing on my pre-medicine studies at Howard University, I developed an alternative approach using materials available in standard medical kits." Murrow nodded appreciatively. I understand your device is now being implemented throughout the invasion force. Yes, sir. The Medical Corps has designated it the Thoracic Decompression Device Type J and is training all combat medics in its application. That's quite an achievement for a young medic, Murrow noted. What has the response been from the medical community here? Jefferson considered his answer carefully. The surgeons and physicians I've worked with have been extremely supportive. Medicine transcends the usual boundaries. What matters is saving lives regardless of who developed the technique. Murrow seemed to appreciate the subtle reference to racial dynamics. And tell us about the 320th Barrage Balloon Battalion. What is your unit's mission here in Normandy? Jefferson gestured to the silver balloon floating above them. We deploy and maintain barrage balloons like this one to protect the beachhead from enemy aircraft. The balloons force enemy planes to fly at higher altitudes, making them more vulnerable to anti-aircraft fire and less effective in bombing or strafing runs. An essential defensive measure, Murrow observed, one that protects every soldier on this beachhead, regardless of race or rank. The interview continued for several more minutes, with Jefferson describing both the technical aspects of his medical device and the experience of the 320th during the invasion. When it concluded, Murrow shook his hand firmly. Thank you, Private Jefferson. Your story will be heard across America. In the weeks and months that followed, the Jefferson device became standard equipment throughout the European theater. Wilson Jefferson continued serving with distinction, earning a battlefield commission to second lieutenant by war's end. His innovation saved hundreds of lives on battlefields from Normandy to the Rhine. After the war, Jefferson completed his medical education at Howard University, supported by the GI Bill and a special scholarship from the Medical Corps. He became Dr. Wilson Jefferson in 1949, specializing in trauma surgery and emergency medicine. His wartime invention evolved into standard protocol for treating thoracic trauma in both military and civilian settings. The barriers Jefferson broke extended beyond medicine. Murrow's broadcast highlighted the contributions of black soldiers when such recognition was rare, helping shift public perception and contributing, in some small way, to the civil rights advancements that would follow. In 1953, the Army Medical Corps officially renamed his invention the Jefferson Thoracic Decompression Device in all medical manuals. It remained in use through Korea, Vietnam, and beyond, a lasting legacy from a man once told his ideas were ridiculous. Dr. Jefferson established a free clinic in his hometown, treating patients of all races and training a new generation of physicians. When asked about his wartime innovation, he would often say, "Necessity forced the world to see beyond color to capability. Progress happens when we continue that vision in times of peace." His simple device, born from desperation on the bloodiest beach in American military history, ultimately saved thousands of lives and opened doors previously closed to men and women of color in medicine. The ridiculous idea that one man refused to abandon became his enduring contribution to humanity, proof that innovation can come from anywhere when talent is given the chance to flourish. Wilson Jefferson passed away in 1989, honored by the medical community and military alike. His medal citation hangs today in the National Museum of African American History and Culture, alongside the original prototype of his device, testament to one man's refusal to accept that something vital was ridiculous simply because of who proposed it. And that concludes our story. If you made it this far, please share your thoughts in the comments. What part of this historical account surprised you most? Don't forget to subscribe for more untold stories from World War II and check out the video on screen for another incredible tale from history. Until next time.